Hello, I'm Nick Park. I'm the Director of Evangelical Alliance Ireland, and this is our weekly message. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. The true measure of a society's worth and a society's integrity and compassion is how that society treats the most weakest and most vulnerable among them. That is not only true of a society, that is true of a church as well. We've made this point again and again when speaking about the unborn child, when speaking about the whole idea of assisted suicide, and when speaking about how we have an onus upon us to protect the vulnerable during a pandemic. Now, one of the most vulnerable sectors of society is, of course, those with learning difficulties and special needs, and families with special needs children. And as we as churches are getting back into the swing of worship and getting used to meeting together once again after the lockdowns, and really I'm seeing a lot of baptisms taking place in different churches, a lot of hope, a lot of restoration taking place. One group that must not be forgotten in our churches are the families with special needs, because one disturbing thing that I am hearing is that families with special needs children are slow to return to church after the pandemic. This is happening not just in Ireland, but in many parts of the world. This is a common thread. You see, let me explain. I like to see the big picture. I'm the pastor of a local church. I'm involved in what's happening in the church, but I like to see the bigger picture of what's going on with the Church of Jesus Christ on a wider basis. And what we are seeing in many countries in the world is families with special needs children are finding it much harder to return to church. Now, why would that be? Well, one reason, of course, is that people with special needs are much more vulnerable to infection and sickness. A report this week in the UK came to the quite shocking statistics that people with learning difficulties in the UK have been 5 times more likely to be hospitalized with COVID than the rest of the UK population. And people with learning difficulties have been 8 times more likely to die of COVID than the rest of the population. That, to me, is a very clear indication that while we want to see things getting back to normal, we must never downplay the seriousness of a pandemic which has affected the vulnerable who we are supposed to be caring for. So quite understandably, families with special needs children are cautious about returning to church, probably much more cautious than many other people. A second reason why families with special needs are being slow to return to church is because many of them feel let down. Now, even before the pandemic came along, I believe that churches needed to do so much more for families with special needs. And we actually hosted a seminar through EAI. By partnering with a ministry in the UK, we brought in somebody to speak on this from the United States. And some found that helpful, some didn't. Some found the approach that ministry was suggesting would not work for them and was not helpful, but some did find it helpful. But it was certainly an area where we felt there's so much more still to be done, and where we're not really doing as much as churches as we should. But the fact is that a survey of Christians throughout the UK, throughout all the pandemic and the lockdowns and everything else, among all the many different and interesting conclusions that were drawn from this survey, one that I found shocking was this. It said most parents of special needs children felt isolated and abandoned by churches during the COVID restrictions, and some of those parents said that their faith was hanging on by a thread. That's got to be an issue of concern to all Christians, I believe. There's another reason why some special needs families are being slower to return to church, and this is quite a strange one in a way. in that one parent of a special needs child said this to reporters in the United States. They said, "We're hearing everybody else in church talking about getting back to normal." They said, "But actually we don't want to get back to normal." And this parent actually went on to say that they had preferred the way church was done during the pandemic to how it was done normally. They said that normally they would take their child into church. People would turn and stare at them if their child was shouting out or behaving in any way unusual. They had to worry about if there was flashing lights and loud noise, that their child might have a seizure, whatever. And this parent actually said that sitting at home and watching the service online without all the drama of trying to cope with a special needs child in a conventional church service, they actually preferred the online church experience. And so there are some families with special needs children who to be honest, because not very much is being done in the church services, physical church services, to make them feel normal, they're much happier to continue with online services. Now, these are obviously different reasons and different factors that are involved in this, but I really believe that there is an onus upon us as Christians, and particularly those of us who are Christian leaders, to address this issue. I would love to hear from pastors and church leaders about any ideas you might have for how, as we come back from this pandemic, as to how we can make ministry more meaningful and more effective and make church a more welcoming place for families with special needs children. Also, I would love to hear from you if you are a special needs family and if you have something that you would like to say to me about this and something that you wish that churches would do and how we can do better. I would love to hear from you as well. So whether you're a church leader, or whether you're perhaps somebody in a family where someone has special needs or learning difficulties, please contact me. My email is nick@evangelical.ie. And I believe that by talking together, we can make church a more welcoming place for the most vulnerable in our society. That's something I feel passionate about. I want to connect with others who are passionate to see that happening as well. And if you're not a church leader that has any influence on how your church is going to react to families and welcome families with special needs, and maybe you're not in a family with special needs, I would ask you to pray that we as the church will do better in this regard, because we have to do better. Why? Because it might be Friday, but Sunday's coming.